Peter Credlin, live on Sky News Australia.
Well, good evening and welcome to the show. I'm James McPherson. Here's what's coming up on the program. We've been saying it all along, but now there are fresh warnings from the regulator that our renewables rollout isn't keeping pace with energy needs. In a resource country, that is a travesty. The figures are in and they're not good. There's been a 738% increase in anti-Semitic incidents since the October 7 terror attacks. This comes at the same time that Labor has turned their back on our Israeli allies. Plus, yet another example of cultural heritage madness, with Victorian rock climbers barred from a popular site after Indigenous art was discovered. And worrying developments in the Middle East, with signs Iran is escalating the conflict. We'll speak with an expert shortly about what this means for Australia. But first, news today that authorities have foiled terror attacks in Denmark and Germany surely heightens the need for Australian authorities to crack down harder on anti-Semitism. Overnight, 3 Islamists believed to be acting on behalf of Hamas were arrested in Denmark. Another was arrested in the Netherlands, and 3 more suspected members of Hamas were arrested in Berlin, accused of preparing an attack against Jews there. Now, Europe is a long way from Gaza, but the potential for attacks against Jews in the West is something authorities have warned about from the moment Hamas launched their October 7 war. We can only hope the events in Europe overnight are enough to get authorities here to take anti-Semitism more seriously. The level of Jew hatred in Australia has, quite frankly, been shocking, as has the limp-wristed response. And just to help the social cohesion, the Albanese government is importing 860 refugees from Gaza, where they're taught from childhood to hate Jews. The government is doing all of this in quick time with what many doubt could possibly be adequate security checks. But don't worry, the Albanese government tell us they've got it all under control, just like they've got, the borders under control and dangerous detainees under control and anti-Semitism under control. As we come into Christmas, when crowds gather in public places to celebrate the birth of a Jew, with anti-Semitism running rampant and reports of Hamas operatives planning terror attacks in Western nations, you'd want to hope that Anthony Albanese and Claire O'Neill and Andrew Giles and Penny Wong really do have it all under control. And while we're talking about fallout from events in Gaza, one of the strangest things has been the unlikely alliances that have been created. I'm thinking specifically about Queers for Palestine.
What for you to come to the protest today?
I came with Queers for Palestine. I'm a trans, non-binary person. I believe we're not free until everyone's free. Queer liberation, queer people live in Palestine. There's pinkwashing going on and people are trying to tell queer people that they can't be part of what's going on in Palestine, and I just want to be here for queer Palestinians and for every Palestinian, because what's happening is disgusting.
Watching gay rights activists march through cities around the world advocating for the rights of Islamists to go full jihad, I couldn't help but be reminded of a time that they did. And I bring this up because, worryingly, I don't think we've learned much from it. Back in June 2020, 3 Brits were stabbed to death in broad daylight by a Libyan refugee yelling Allah Akbar. It was later revealed that the men he killed, as they socialised in a Reading park, were all gay. And the attack was, quote, an act of religious jihad. CNN reported it as, and I quote, a UK stabbing incident. Ah, yes, a UK stabbing incident. Kind of like that New York jet plane incident back in September of 2001. The world dismissed the incident, like a virus in a Wuhan wet market, as just one of those things that happens from time to time. British police issued a public order notice saying, quote, out of respect for those deceased, please do not circulate footage of the dead on social media. Well, of course, without footage of the deceased lying in pools of their own blood on the lawns of Frombury Gardens, politicians and the media could maintain the fiction that it was a mostly peaceful jihad. LGBT rights charity Stonewall UK told their 200,000 Twitter followers, quote, it's heartbreaking to hear 2 of the victims were LGBT, but we can't let Islamophobic, racist and xenophobic rhetoric be used to divide us. We must stand together to make progress. When even the gay rights campaigners eulogise you with killing gays is bad, but the real concern here is Islamophobic rhetoric, you really are in trouble. James Furlong, David Wales and Joseph Ritchie Bennett were stabbed in the neck by an Islamist and then stabbed in the back by their own community. Q News reported that, and I quote, "After the men were identified, mourners gathered outside the pub for a minute's silence and played Somewhere Over the Rainbow." So an Islamic jihadi murders gay men and Westerners respond with a fabulous tune from The Wizard of Oz. That'll show 'em. Over the Rainbow was made famous by Judy Garland, who, as Dorothy, muses to Toto that there must be a safe space somewhere.
Some place where there isn't any trouble. Do you suppose there is such a place, Toto? There must be. It's not a place you can get to by a boat or a train. It's far, far away. Behind the moon, beyond the rain. Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high.
Well, that safe space certainly not in Britain or anywhere else in the politically correct West. Even Toto knew that. Queers for Palestine, on the other hand, well, they're not that smart. Reading Pride co-founder Jamie Wake said at the time of the stabbings, "I wish I could stand here and say I can make sense of the senseless. Sadly today, like many others, I can't." Well, for every jihadist, there are 1,000 Jamie Wakes who are so woke as to be unable to make the connection between gays being thrown from buildings in Islamic nations and gays being stabbed to death by an Islamist just up the road. Reading Council leader Jason Brock promised a permanent memorial where people could pay their respects to the victims. And this is the well-rehearsed role of local officials after terror attacks these days. They won't promise action to ensure you can enjoy a summer's evening in the park without getting all jihaded, but they can promise that those who survive you will have a place to mourn. The memorial was unveiled a couple of months ago, ironically, right before Queers for Palestine marches began throughout the West. The Bishop of Reading, Olivia Graham, told mourners, "You know, we still can't believe that this has happened. This is the kind of thing that happens in other places." By other places, one presumes the bishop meant London Bridge, Thornton Heath, Manchester, Westminster, Parsons Green. The UK's Interior Minister lit a candle at the vigil since that was easier than doing actual policing to stop Islamists. She said, "What we saw here in Reading was the actions of one lone individual. The security services have records on thousands of people, and rightly so." Ah, yes, thousands of lone wolves who, under no circumstances, are ever to constitute a pack. The stabbings in Reading were the actions of one lone individual in the same way that bombings dropped on the UK during the Blitz were dropped by lone individuals. Neil Berceau, the national head of counter-terrorism policing, told the ABC that, and I quote, "We must be vigilant to the ongoing threat. If you see any suspicious activity, don't hesitate to report it." Except the perpetrator had been reported. He was on MI5's radar a year prior to the attack, only to be dismissed as not so much a lone wolf as a lone blip. Jonathan Hall, the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, whose job is to inform UK public debate on security laws, told the ABC that the terrorist may have been, quote, "suffering from poor mental health." So you're not allowed to say anything that might imply some people like to kill infidels, since that would unfairly stigmatise an entire group of people. But you are allowed to suggest that people prone to depression are likely to go on a stabbing spree. The ABC concluded its report by helpfully noting that the attack was reminiscent of some recent incidents in Britain that authorities also called terrorism. For the media, every lone wolf attack is vaguely reminiscent of a recent unrelated incident that will not divide us because mental health and religion of peace, and we're all in this together and somewhere over the rainbow. I wonder what James Furlong, David Wales and Joseph Ritchie Bennett would make of Queers for Palestine calling on Israel to go easy on Hamas. Sadly, we'll never know. Well, let's head to Canberra now for tonight's political headlines with Sky News political reporter Trudy McIntosh.
Good evening. The US Congress has given the green light to sell Australia nuclear-powered submarines under the AUKUS deal. The House of Representatives signed off on the defence deal just a day after the Senate. It paves the way for the sale of 3 Virginia-class subs to Australia.
I am very happy, and it is a historic moment. It's the first time America has ever authorised the sale of a nuclear-powered submarine to any other country.
I myself spoke to over 100 members of Congress to get this legislation passed. That means that AUKUS can go ahead.
The path for AUKUS has not always been smooth sailing. The legislation still leaves open the door to America backing out of the transfer if its own submarine production is not sufficient. But one of the key advocates inside Congress, Democrat Joe Courtney, argues the deal enhances America's own security.
This effort will rebalance the strategic environment in the Indo-Pacific in favour of free, democratic nations that today are being constantly pressurised by the aggressive actions of the world's largest navy, namely the Chinese PLA-N. Stephen
Miles has been sworn in as Queensland's next Premier, replacing Anastasia Palaszczuk. His elevation rubber-stamped at a meeting of Labor MPs at State Parliament this morning. Mr Miles emerged with his deputy, Cameron Dick, naming 5 new ministers.
They are younger, they are energetic, they are ready to deliver a fresh approach for Queenslanders.
So fresh, the new Premier was even tripped up on one of their names.
And Charisse Naumis. Mullen. Sorry.
The opposition is looking to paint the new Labor team as owned by union operatives.
And it's a government that is beholden to the union movement now, to a handful of power brokers whose name will never appear on the ballot paper.
And the Prime Minister has led the tributes to Labor MP Peter Murphy at a memorial service in Melbourne. The member for Dunkley died aged 50 after a battle with breast cancer. She's been remembered for her fierce advocacy and respect from colleagues right across the political aisle.
An outstanding local member, a brilliant parliamentarian, and the very best kind of colleague and friend.
Trudy McIntosh, Sky News, Canberra.
OK, well, if you thought 60.8% of Australians voting no was the end of an Indigenous voice to Parliament, well, you were wrong. With the Indigenous community's self-declared mourning period well and truly over, Labor is now considering how it can roll out local and regional voices across the country without legislation. As reported in the Australian today, one option being looked at is expanding empowered communities. That's a program that puts Indigenous people from remote regional and urban areas in the same room as government decision makers. Now, that program currently covers 10 regions at a cost of $47 million over 9 years, but it's believed that scheme could be scaled up. Let's bring in One Nation Chief of Staff James Ashby for more on this. James, welcome. Great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you joining me. Australians overwhelmingly said no to the voice to Parliament, but Labor seem adamant about pushing forward with a version of it regardless. Why do you think this is?
Well, it's another example of a broken promise from Anthony Albanese. He was a Prime Minister who said, I will accept the will of the Australian people on this yes or no vote that occurred earlier this year, and he has completely ignored that of the people of Australia. So regardless of what we've said, he and his ministers continue to push forward. And that is the same right across the state as well, with premiers across the country. Anthony Albanese does not have a mandate to go and implement, whether it be Makarrata or truth-telling. We've got some issues in remote parts of our country, but not just for Indigenous people, but for all Australians. We know that there's plenty of rural people living in these remote areas. Pauline Hanson, myself, we've travelled into some of the more remote Aboriginal communities of Queensland, been welcomed with open arms. And I can tell you, a lot of these communities don't go without. They have great resources, whether it be schools, swimming pools, health, and none of which have been properly utilised. I'm not quite sure how this Albanese government intends to improve upon the disadvantage they talk about. At the present moment, in places like Bamaga and Doomadgee, we're paying in excess of $1 million per home for Indigenous people. We've spent close to $34 billion this year on Aboriginal people across the country. Now, until we have a Royal Commission into the spending that already occurs on a national level from our federal government, there shouldn't be any further implementation of further voices or whatever it may be that this federal government plan to implement. If Anthony Albanese plans to make changes to legislation or to the way in which we treat Aboriginals in this country, perhaps he needs to take it to the next federal election, do it in 2025, and if the Australian people want further change, well, he'll get his mandate then. But until then, I wouldn't say he's got the Australian people's support.
I absolutely agree with you. Let's go to Victoria. Premier Jacinta Allen is blaming a $16 billion cost blowout. Can you believe that? That's on the North East Link. She's blaming it on inflation. Now, the project is going to be $26 billion. That's $2.4 billion for each kilometre of road. That doesn't stack up, does it? How can it blow out by that much? I mean, inflation is bad, but it's not that bad.
Well, here in Queensland, we're paying over $1 million a kilometre for road networks in most parts of the country, right? In most parts of this state, at least. We're seeing this right across the country, though. It's not just Victoria. A project that was set at $5 billion is now worth well in excess of 20. We've got the same problem here in Queensland. Labor don't know how to manage money, whether it be state or federally. And in Queensland here, we've got a Olympics that has been promised to the people to be cost neutral. That's not the case anymore. We've got a stadium that started off as $1 billion. It's now worth 2.7. We've had rail blowouts, whether it be for train networks or duplication of rail networks between Caboolture and the Sunshine Coast. Where I am in central Queensland there, they've got all their figures wrong with Yeppoon to Rockhampton Road. Even the ring road that bypasses Rocky has gone from $1 billion to 1.7. They think that this money grows on trees. No, it comes from the hip pocket of every single Queenslander, every single Australian taxpayer, and they have no regard for the money that we graciously give over in good faith every year in taxes. And as Kerry Packer said, why should I pay any more tax when you guys don't spend it right in the first place? So I'm with Kerry Packer. The less tax we pay in this country, the better, because these buggers, they don't get it right and they never get a project done on cost.
James, when you started listing Labor blowouts, I thought we're going to run out of time on this program. We don't have time to list them all. Yeah. Interestingly, Jacinta Allen, the Premier, of course, she was in charge of the infrastructure that is now blowing out. Now she's the Premier, so she's got her hands full with that mess. Just quickly before we go, in your home state of Queensland, we've now officially got a new Premier. Stephen Miles was sworn in today. There's a state election due next year. Now, just trying to be apolitical for a moment, do you think he can turn around Labor's fortunes? Has he got enough time, and is he the man to do it?
Well, he's not the only giggler in this state. He's got the rest of the state giggling as well over the fact that he intends to turn their fortunes around. No, it's going to be tough for Labor, but it's even going to be tougher for the coalition who are in opposition at the moment to form government in their own right. They've got to win 14 seats. They are going to need people like One Nation to form government. 14 seats is a big ask, and it's not possible, and that's due to the fact that they're not representing regional Queensland, and neither are Labor, and they don't have plans for this state. One Nation have already said that we'll come out and we'll scrap the stamp duty on general insurance across this state. Labor have come out today and have actually rehashed old LNP policy from the previous election, like introducing a helicopter for North Queensland and discounts on public transport.
What I loved was when Stephen Miles came out and said they're going to freeze car registration for 12 months, which I think was going to save Queenslanders something like $15 a year. James Ashby, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Well, now let's go to the Middle East, where the US government has called on Australia to provide naval support in the Red Sea as Iranian-backed Houthi rebels attack ships. The US Navy has asked Australia to send a warship after rebels struck at least 3 commercial ships, threatening vital global sea channels. But the government is reportedly wary of fulfilling the request, with Defence Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles saying naval efforts right now need to be focused on the Indo-Pacific region. For more, I'm joined by Senior Analyst at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, Malcolm Davis. Malcolm, welcome.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Malcolm, welcome. That's a sentence I should never try to attempt ever again. Hey, listen, we're usually pretty quick to ask how high when the US says jump. What's different in this case? Why are the government hesitating?
Look, I think they're hesitating for understandable reasons in one sense, in the sense that we do have to focus on the Indo-Pacific region. We do face a major challenge from China. We can't afford to leave the cupboard bare, shall we say, in terms of ready capability. When you look at what's happening in the South China Sea, where PLA Navy vessels and Coast Guard vessels are harassing Filipino ships, I think we do have a primary concern in the Indo-Pacific. But at the same time, we do have an interest in supporting the United States in protecting international maritime trade. We rely on that trade, and whilst it would be very nice to be able to protect that trade only in the Indo-Pacific region, we can't ignore the fact that those sea lanes of communication stretch all the way to the Red Sea and to the Persian Gulf. And so therefore, if they're interdicted, if shipping is harassed or attacked in those regions, and the US needs our assistance, then I think it's probably in our strategic and political interest to support the US in this regard.
If these attacks continue in the Red Sea and in that region, what are the broader implications?
Well, look, if they continue, then I think that it's incumbent upon the US then to step up its response. If you look at how the US has been responding since October 7th, when Iranian-backed units and groups in Iraq and Syria, and now the Houthis across the Red Sea, the US has been responding very defensively, in what could be called a pinprick response, very limited and precise. And whilst that's been avoiding escalation and it's been certainly generating military effect, it hasn't been generating deterrence. It hasn't been deterring the Iranians from carrying out these attacks in the future. So I do think that if these attacks continue, then the Biden administration may actually need to take it to the next level to impose additional cost on Iran to bring these attacks to a halt.
So if that happens and the Biden administration, as you say, need to escalate things, because at the moment, pinprick response, it just keeps going, right? So if they're going to curtail this, meaning they've got to escalate things, and then we've got a warship based there to help, does that not entangle Australia in something we maybe don't want to be involved in?
Not necessarily. I mean, our warship, our frigate or destroyer, whatever we send, can operate in a manner that's not necessarily right at the cutting edge of operations. It can basically provide a defensive role for US and other warships in the rear, or if we choose to do so, we can take a more forward edge role and directly support any fight. But remember, what we're talking about here is one option, for example, would be to strike at the Houthis really decisively and take out a lot of their military capability, rather than with pinprick attacks, actually go after their fighting forces, go after their limited naval capabilities, and particularly go after their missile systems and decimate them. And that would send a very strong message to Tehran that, we did this to the Houthis. If you continue to use forces across the region to attack us, then you'll be next. And whilst we don't want to get sucked into another Middle Eastern war, we can't simply allow Iran to utilize these groups to interfere with shipping and to cause chaos and mayhem across the region.
Malcolm, just before we finish, Scott Morrison wrote in The Australian this morning, or was interviewed in The Australian this morning, and he said, in light of the fact that we're getting nuclear subs now from the US, we're sort of beholden to do what the US need us to do, i.e. sending a ship to the Red Sea. But also in the United Nations, we broke ranks with the US and voted against Israel in favour of a humanitarian ceasefire. How careful does Australia need to be with our commitment now with these nuclear subs to towing the line with America?
Look, we do have options. One of the options would be that rather than sending a ship to the Middle East, we could send a ship up to the South China Sea or the Sea of Japan to free up a US Navy ship to go to the Middle East. So we don't necessarily have to go directly into the fray. But I do think we have to be cognizant of the political implications of saying no to America without providing any alternative options to the US. That AUKUS legislation that's working its way through Congress and has now been approved by Congress, that's a great move going forward. I think it does send a very strong signal in terms of US support for AUKUS. But that support for AUKUS from the US Congress and from future administrations isn't going to be strong enough if we see the current Australian government or a future Australian government being hesitant about supporting the US in these key security issues. So I do think we have to be politically savvy as well as strategically minded in how we utilize our military capabilities, recognizing that, yes, there are multiple threats that we are facing in multiple regions, and we cannot have the luxury of simply choosing one region to operate in.
Malcolm Davis, thanks for your time. Well, coming up, we'll talk to a top Jewish leader about the concerning rise in anti-Semitism across Australia since Hamas attacked Israel on October 7. Plus, a popular climbing and bouldering range has been shut down because rock art and Indigenous artefacts have been discovered at the site. We'll get the details in just a moment. Welcome back. I'm James McPherson, filling in for Peter Credlin. Well, we knew it was happening. We've been reporting it here on Sky News for months. Now there's data to back it up. I'm talking about the rise in anti-Semitism in Australia since Hamas attacked Israel on October 7. A report out today from the Executive Council of Australian Jewry shows reports of serious incidents of anti-Semitism have risen 738%. The country's peak Jewish body says that's just the tip of the iceberg, with many more incidents going unreported. Dr. David Adler is the president of the Australian Jewish Association, and he joins me now. David, great to have you in the studio.
Thank you.
These figures, 738% rise in anti-Semitism, does it surprise you?
What surprised us and actually shocked us was the explosion of anti-Semitism that occurred since the 7th of October. We always knew in Australia, like everywhere else, there was a grumbling bit of anti-Semitism, mainly on the fringes. Australia had a pretty good reputation, but there's been multiple types of incidents occur, and I suspect that the actual report that you're referencing understates it. Our organisation has received many dozens of threats and reports of incidents. Some people want to report it, some people don't.
Right.
So there is a lot out there, and it's been a bit of a game changer in terms of anti-Semitism.
Some of the examples in the report are truly horrifying. There's synagogues that have had bomb threats. There's Jewish businesses, Jewish-owned shops that have been vandalised. And then there's numbers of death threats, which I believe you personally have experienced quite frightening death threats. Can you talk to us about that?
You're right. I have received a significant death threat. It was an unusual way of getting it. Someone actually typed up a long, rambling letter full of obscenities, included terms like, you know, I know where you live, I will hunt you down and kill you. It was sent to the office of the Australian Jewish Association, and the police have looked into it, doing forensic analysis on it. Hopefully the police will catch the person responsible, but at this stage, not likely.
I'm struck by your bravery to speak out as you do when you're subjected to that sort of abuse and threat level. Can you talk to me, not just about yourself, but the Jewish community generally? It's pretty difficult for those of us who are non-Jews to appreciate what it must be like. What is it like for Jews right now in Australia?
Look, it's been said that if you ask a Jewish person the usual opening question in a conversation, how are you feeling, are you okay, whatever it is, if they're able to open up to you, they will tell you, no, we're not okay. We're not okay with having the sort of incident that occurred in Israel, where the largest massacre of Jewish people since the Holocaust has occurred. And the community in Australia, just about all of us, have friends or family in Israel. And we're not okay with what's happening in Australia, with the intimidation, with the harassment, with the threats. It is un-Australian. It's something that we don't want to see in a liberal democracy, and we're hoping that the authorities will listen to us and take certain initiatives to get on top of it very quickly.
One of the most horrifying incidents of anti-Semitism we saw after October 7 was on October 9. It didn't take long on the steps of the Opera House when people were chanting "Gas the Jews." Now, that video evidence has been given to police for investigation. I can't believe we're still waiting for something to be done about that. But in the meantime, Crikey have published an article with claims that it's difficult to verify whether it was "Gas the Jews" that was actually said. And now Labor MP Stephen Lawrence has suggested, well, it might have been AI that was used to alter the clip so it sounded like "Gas the Jews." Now, you're shaking your head in disgust.
Absolutely.
What's your response to those claims and how does that make you feel?
Well, we know that there is a trend which is, I guess, Holocaust denial type of thinking, where for some reason people who want to undermine the Jewish community say that the horrific events didn't happen. We've seen it in Israel lately, where people deny the evidence of the Hamas atrocities, and so it's happening with the video evidence of what's happened at the Opera House. I have seen the videos. I have also recently seen the unedited raw video. I know it was circulated to numerous media organisations internationally, not one of which has questioned the authenticity. So we have this odd group in Crikey, and frankly, it's already been debunked. The raw video has been looked at. It was broadcast on Sky yesterday by Sherry Markson. It has exactly the same audio as the first clip that was released. We have a number of witnesses who heard the "Guess the Jew" chant, one of whom we've released their statement, a video statement, on our social media. So there are witnesses, there are videos, there is verification from other media organisations, and still some people are denying it. That says a lot more about the people than it does about the video that demonstrates it.
The denials are abhorrent, and it's shocking to me that police still haven't charged anybody over that incident. David Adler, always appreciate your time. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, James.
Well, now to the Grampians National Park, a stunning environmental landscape about 3 hours west of Melbourne. Being the Christmas holidays, you might be thinking about heading there to enjoy the scenic hikes, picturesque waterfalls, or if you like things extreme, not me, but maybe you, might want to try out some of the challenging rock climbing areas. Well, think again. The popular mountain lion location in the Victoria Range, which has previously been cleared and opened for bouldering and climbing, has been shut down because rock art and Indigenous artefacts have been discovered at the site. Climbers are understandably frustrated and fear other areas could suffer a similar fate. Australian Climbing Association Victoria President Mike Tompkins joins me to shed some light on what's happening. Mike, welcome. I appreciate your time. This spot has been open to climbers for a while. How are they just now discovering Indigenous art and artefacts?
Well, it's been something of a mystery to climbers that this has happened, because over the last 5 years, 80% of the rock climbing in the Grampians has been banned. Surveys were done at approximately a third of the locations. Many of the locations were just closed without any surveys being done. There are hundreds of locations where no survey's been done. And at a few locations, they've been cleared for rock climbing, and now one of them has been closed again after they've gone back after 3 years and gone to find artefacts there.
This isn't the first time that this has happened, is it? It seems Park Victoria has been opening and closing these sites at will for some time.
It's been a long journey here, and what really it comes down to is the integrity of the surveys that have been carried out and the interpretation of what is culture, what is art. So Parks Victoria has made a horrible mess of managing the Grampians for the last 5 years, and we would call upon the chairman of Park Victoria, John Pandazopoulos, to launch an independent inquiry chaired by a judge, because his board of executives, led by Matthew Jackson, has really been fostering division rather than reconciliation over this matter.
Well, I hope it's resolved soon, Mike. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it. Coming up, we'll talk to Keith Pitt about why Australia's wholesale power prices have tripled over the last decade or so. Plus, we'll get the latest from our panel on Barry Humphrey's funeral at the Sydney Opera House today. Welcome back. Now, I want to go to the energy situation in this country, which continues to deteriorate. This afternoon, I looked at the latest figures and found that average wholesale power prices in New South Wales this month are 3.5 times higher than in December 2008, 15 years ago. What's changed in the grid? Well, state and federal governments have gone all in on renewables, which has led to the neglect of our ageing coal-fired power plants. Joining me to discuss this is an electrical engineer turned Liberal national member for North Queensland seat of Hinkler, Keith Pitt, who knows a lot more about our power infrastructure than Energy Minister Chris Bowen, who's never had a job outside of politics. Keith, did you like that introduction?
Mate, fantastic.
Look, Keith, there's no doubt wholesale power prices have at least tripled over the past 10, 15 years. What's driven this shocking rise and what impact is it having on not just the economy, but even on our national security?
Well, the short version is this. In New South Wales, the state government sold their coal-fired power station. In Victoria, they closed them and then refused to develop their own gas reserves, so there's a gas shortfall, hence driving up the price. And in Queensland, they're robbing the electricity consumer blind. They take more than $1 billion out of the electricity network into the government coffers every year. And then on top of that, I think they gave them something like $10 billion in an additional debt to prop up their own budget. And they're trying to replace it with something which is intermittent and unreliable and doesn't work. Don't forget, 500,000 additional Australians in the last 12 months who all want electricity. All of those things combined to give us the situation we're in now.
Yeah, I mean, we had that shocking situation yesterday in Sydney where we had the Energy Minister practically pleading for people, if you don't have to put the aircon on or your dryer or your dishwasher, we'd rather you didn't. And of course, they're trying to get us to drive EVs and then telling us we'd rather you didn't plug them in. So it's madness. The energy market operator, speaking of madness, has just brought forward the expected closure of our coal-fired power plants by about 5 years, I think it is. Meanwhile, there's warnings that Australia needs to double its rollout of new transmission lines by the end of the decade or risk rolling blackouts. Are we on the path to blackouts? I mean, we talk about it as being an option. How serious a threat do you think that is?
Oh, it's incredibly serious. And don't forget, AEMO forecast the potential of 60% increase in demand for electric vehicle chargers. And their statement today, and get this, is that you need to install almost 200 gigawatts of intermittent wind and solar, including rooftop solar, and about 74 gigawatts of dispatchable energy, whether it's pumped hydro or batteries or gas, to replace what is currently there, which is only 65. Now, this is because it is intermittent, it doesn't work, it averages about 30% capacity if you're lucky, and 10,000 kilometres plus of transmission. And yet somehow, Chris Bowen says with a straight face, this is cheaper. It will cost people less.
Yeah, it's quite incredible. And then on top of that, I mean, it's all right for us in the cities, we've got our problems, but then you've got farmers and people in regional communities who are concerned about the rollout of massive transmission towers. And that's before we talk about wind turbines and solar farms. And yet at the same time, the energy market operator is now warning we need even more transmission lines. And it's going to cost more billions of dollars. I mean, it really is madness.
Well, it's literally millions of hectares in terms of the footprint. Nobody wants a transmission line in their backyard, particularly HV. And yet, as part of this new plan, that's what's desperately needed, apparently, to connect everything up. So, you know, if you get a cyclone in the north, somehow you're going to run the power system from Victoria into Cairns and North Queensland, and that will all once again be cheaper. But I'll give you a hot tip. All those coal-fired power stations out there now, we will still need them in 10 or 15 years' time because things will just get in the way. Environmental approvals, cultural and heritage issues, people appealing and holding these up in the courts. And on top of that, you've got Labor funding organisations like the Environmental Defenders Office to shut down oil and gas projects that we actually need.
I mean, like me, you would have watched our political leaders from around the world. Chris Bowen was amongst them, giving themselves a standing ovation at the climate conference for agreeing that we need to phase out fossil fuels. Meanwhile, back here, as I said, in Sydney, we're being told, please don't use your air conditioner. Does Chris Bowen really believe that we can make this transition work, or is he really just sort of fingers crossed, hoping and, you know, maybe it'll all work out in the sweet by and by?
Oh, I think he's a true believer. There's no doubt about that. But it's not. These are not decisions based on engineering and economics. They really aren't. Because on top of all the costs, and the transmission costs aren't factored in yet, you've actually got to do things with frequency control and a thing called system strength, which makes sure that the network is stable. Now, a lot of that comes inherently in traditional generators, like coal-fired power stations and traditional hydro and gas. But you've actually got to pay for that with intermittent wind and solar because they've just got no strength to them. The idea that our economy will run on this, our nation will actually be safe and strong with this type of energy network, I just think it's folly.
Just quickly, divisions emerging within the Labor Party as the Australian Workers' Union and the Maritime Union call on the Commonwealth and states to support offshore gas. But then you've got Green activists, many of whom are on the PM's front bench, who don't want that. So who wins in that fight, the unions or the activists?
Well, what a crock. Don't listen to what they say, look at what they do. The Labor government is funding the Environmental Defender's Office with taxpayers' money to the tune of $2.4 million a year and $9 million up front in their first budget, and yet they say that they're all for the resources sector. The taxpayer is funding these activists. The unions want to stop it. Well, they should get on the phone and ring the minister and stop that money now. That'd be the first step.
Keith, I appreciate your time. Well, I want to welcome the panel, Tina McQueen and Joe Hildebrand. Great to have you guys
Lovely
with me.
to be here. How are you, mate?
At Sydney Opera House today saw hundreds of people from across the political and entertainment worlds gather to pay tribute to legendary Australian comedian Barry Humphries, who is, of course, most famous for his alter egos Dame Edna Everage and Sir Les Patterson. He was remembered at the service as a cultural icon, an internationally renowned genius and a great Australian.
Barry Humphries was one of the funniest people in the world, but you all know that. But he's also one of the kindest and most generous person to me.
Barry, you will never be strangled. You will never be silenced. Your voice still echoes, your wisdom still enlightens, and your friendship still resides deeply in my heart.
Tina, it's the end of an era for Australian comedy, isn't it?
Oh, it sure is. Just look at the people that came forward to pay their respect to him today. He was magnificent, so funny, so clever. I don't think we'll ever see anything like him, her again. Such a great loss.
What do you reckon, Joe? Will we ever see a comedian that good again? I mean, he was great.
I was actually talking about this with my best mate on the way over here. I mean, we are looking at, I think, what intellectuals like to call an inflection point in history when it comes to comedy, because all the funniest people are now on the right, it seems. Like, you look like people like, Dave Chappelle, who is arguably the greatest of all time, Ricky Gervais, of course, who is not, and again, a lot of these people actually don't see themselves as being on the right. I don't think they're on the right, and indeed aren't on the right. They would see themselves as small L liberals or progressive or whatever, but because they do stuff that pokes sacred cows, of course, the left just jumps all over them and calls them all sorts of names under the sun. And so I think with Barry Humphries, I think you're seeing something similar to what happened with Monty Python, where you have these figures who often came from, the best schools, but were still incredibly anti-establishment, irreverent, took the piss out of people who took themselves too seriously, and who would never be able to do what they do now. I mean, Life of Brian would never be able to be made now. John Cleese, of course, has gone on the warpath against woke because he realises that if he was born in this era, he'd have to be an accountant because he couldn't actually tell any of the jokes that he wanted to tell that made him famous. So it is really sad.
Disgraceful what Victoria tried to do to Barry Humphries, though. You know, that I know people close to him, and I know that hurt him dreadfully, and that's why the ceremony today was in Sydney.
Stripping him of the Melbourne Comedy Festival accolades. Yeah, it's these people cannot seem to help themselves, and it's the death of left-wing comedy.
Yeah. He will be greatly missed. All right, we were talking to Keith Pitt just a moment ago about climate change. Get this study from the UK. This is the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology in Edinburgh. They claim that gases in air exhaled from human beings is fueling global warming. So they've done a study to work out how much methane is in your breath when you breathe out. And the paper, and let me quote this, urges caution in the assumption that emissions from humans are negligible. So, Joe, what's next? Are we going to have a tax on breathing, do you reckon?
Oh, no, it doesn't go far enough. We can't just tax it, we've got to stop it altogether. We need to the only way we can save the human race is to wipe out all humans. Without a doubt. And is it just human breath that does it, or does animal breath does it? Because I'm pretty sure all mammals breathe out pretty much the same stuff, don't they? And how is it news that we inhale oxygen and then exhale carbon dioxide and other gases that we don't want in our systems because they're not particularly good for that? Like, how is this a new thing? I do not understand this for the life of me.
Well, when I read these studies, Tina, I always think here is an academic who wanted to work out how can I get some funding, and so they decided let's do so, and anything connected with global warming, they'll get dollars for.
But I've got a great solution. Maybe there's a bit of truth to that, so just shut the left up. You know, there's a lot of gas that would stop. So
That's right. Did you believe it or not? This is a true story.
I'd let you speak, Joe.
I drove a hydrogen car. An electric hydrogen car, which is great, all clean and green and everything. And it actually has on the display monitor a little picture of how many human beings you've saved.
Are you serious?
By driving. Yeah, it's amazing. By driving. So they'll calculate the amount of air that a human being will breathe in compared to how much you've
you just
purified.
Keep driving, you wouldn't stop. Just keep saving people.
But now I realise that we're just saving the bloody humans who are killing us in the first place.
All right, it's almost Christmas. Let's talk about a nicer subject, although the Stonington City Council in Melbourne are stuffing this up. They've put signs across the community wishing everybody make merry, which begs the question, make merry what? Now, they've avoided the word Christmas, Tina, because they said, and I quote, there's a need for an inclusive way to acknowledge the different celebrations held in December. What's amazing is locals are going around vandalising the council signs because they're so annoyed with this make merry rather than Merry Christmas. What are the council thinking?
It's just ridiculous. And you find this with all these councils, particularly in Victoria. It's insane, you know. So, vandal away, I say. And look, to be fully inclusive, bring back Christ into Christmas. There's a novel idea.
Well, I was going to say, Joe, is it non-inclusive to use the word Christmas?
This stuff just does my head in. And like what they don't realise, it's no surprise that it's happened in Melbourne, because of course everyone in Sydney knows that 11 months of the year, the Daily Telegraph just waits to see the first Christmas Grinch emerge from the cracks in the woodwork. And everyone in Sydney, every local council in Sydney, every department, they know not to even try it. You know, they've got a strong cop on the beat. Even Clover Moore, you know, as soon as it's November 1, Halloween's over, the biggest Christmas decorations you've ever seen go straight up. Melbourne, they clearly haven't got the memo. And all I would say is, if you want to make Christmas secular, fine, but you don't get the day off. You don't get the holidays. Yep. And you know what? Without Christmas, there is no holidays. And if people are going around saying happy holidays, what do they think a holiday is? It's a holy day. Mm-hmm. So even if you wish someone happy holidays, you're in fact not being very inclusive of atheists. So I say no holidays whatsoever. We all walk all the time. We all wear grey overalls, and we don't have any diversity whatsoever.
I think some from the left would love that, but it gets worse. We're just getting started on this Christmas stuff. I mean, in Tasmania, ambulance drivers have been told no wearing Christmas symbols. You can't put anything at all on your ambulance to celebrate Christmas because we need to be professional and safe, they've been told. Does having a Christmas decoration on your ambulance really endanger public safety, Tina?
No, and don't any of these people have kids? I mean, part of the joy in Christmas is seeing children light up at every possible Christmas symbol, Santa symbol. So I would say urge all those ambulance drivers and all workers out there to, you know, Santa up. I've got the earrings on. Ho, ho, ho.
Well, I mean, they've been banned from doing this, Joe. If you were suffering a heart attack and a paramedic walks up and she's got, like...
And they've got a sad hat on and say, sorry, no. Call me when a real paramedic comes along. Like, this is this, and again, I just do not understand how anyone could form the link in their head that if someone celebrates Christmas, they therefore must be bad at their job. Mm-hmm. I mean, who even has the time to even think of that? So, what are the risks we got coming up in the next financial year, Jim? Well, we've done a longitudinal study that finds that people who wear Christmas decorations are less likely to be able to save lives.
So let me ask you, what's the real agenda here? Why are people doing this?
It is just bureaucracies, and you see this happen again and again, is bureaucracies being incredibly risk averse. They preempt offence often when there is no actual offence there in the first place. So often these things aren't in response to any complaints or anything like that. It's just crazy box-ticking bureaucrats thinking, all right, I've got to make sure that there is absolutely no way anyone could possibly get remotely upset or find fault with anything I'm doing. And this is what cripples bureaucracy in all other fields, because they're so scared of doing anything wrong or anything that might upset someone that they end up not doing anything at all.
But they also know there's not going to be any pushback, and that's why we should push back. You know, they expect no resistance.
Oh, they'll be pushed back. They'll be pushed back. And I think the Health Workers Union, good on them. The HSU has gone to town on them. They put the ho back into homeopathic medicine. That didn't make any sense.
Speaking of pushbacks, check out this video from the White House. This is their Christmas video. It's gone viral. No one likes it. Have a look. Tina, a fan of that Christmas video from the White House?
No, I am not. They've absolutely bastardised Tchaikovsky. As someone that saw Swan Lake last week, that sickens me. They want to take away all traditions, anything that's sacred. No, it's not even funny. It just disgusts me.
What do you reckon, Joe?
Did you say that was a video?
Yes.
Oh, thank God. I thought I was having an acid flash. Oh, no, I don't have to call the doctor. No, I just don't understand anything that is happening in the world. I mean, this is the ridiculous thing. I'm meant to be the token lefty. I can't defend any of this crap. It's terrible. It's Christmas, right? It's Christmas. It's, you know, even the proddies don't deserve Christmas. It's got to be the Holy Roman Apostolic Catholic Church or nothing. The rest of you all get back to work, go back to your desks, and you don't get the day off.
Hey, listen, we've only got 30 seconds left before we finish. I do want to ask you, Tina, about Gina Reinhardt, who's been voted Business Person of the Year by the Financial Review. She has. I do a little bit of consulting for Mrs. Reinhardt, and it was absolutely magnificent, well deserved. Of course, it will send the left nuts. I urge everyone to go on her website and read her speech. It's spectacular. She didn't hold back, and well deserved. A giant of an Australian. Absolutely, well done, Gina Reinhardt. Well, that's all from me, but don't go anywhere. Coming up in just a moment is Liz Storer. She's filling in for Rita Penahay.